Today, I will tell you a story about the night my life was supposed to feel complete. The night when decades of hard work and sacrifice finally turned into celebration. After selling my company for $20 million, I threw a retirement party in my home on Long Island. I remember the glow of the chandeliers, the sound of glasses touching, and the voices of people who had traveled far to honor me. At that moment, I thought it would be a simple evening of joy, but as I walked toward the long oak table, I noticed my son-in-law's hand trembling as he poured into my wine glass. Later, I would move that glass without a word, and someone else's scream would bring the music to an end. If stories of courage, betrayal, and justice resonate with you, remember to like and subscribe so you can join me for more Grandma Life stories. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. My name is Dorothy Miller, and I am 70 years old. For more than 3 decades, I built a financial consulting company in New York City. It began as a modest office in a rented space above a laundromat. I handled bookkeeping for small businesses while grieving the sudden loss of my husband. What kept me moving forward was not ambition alone, but survival. I had a young daughter to raise, bills to pay, and a reputation to build in a world that often dismissed women of my generation. Over time, that small office grew into a respected firm. Clients trusted me, and my team stayed loyal. By the time I signed the contract to sell it, the company had become worth $20 million. The papers were barely dry when Rachel, my daughter, said, "Mom, we have to celebrate. Let us take care of everything." Her husband Mark nodded, assuring me, "You just sit back. You've earned this." And their insistence warmed me at first. After all, what mother doesn't want her child to feel proud of her? Still, a quiet unease stirred in me, though I could not yet place it. The evening of the party arrived with crisp air rolling in from the Atlantic. Lanterns lined the stone walkway to my home, casting golden light across the lawn. Guests came in clusters. Colleagues who had once sat across from me at negotiation tables, neighbors who had borrowed sugar and swapped garden tips, and friends who had known me since I was a young widow, still learning how to stand on my own 2 feet. My house pulsed with life. Inside, Rachel floated from guest to guest, her smile quick but practiced. Mark carried trays with too much precision, as if every gesture were rehearsed. I stood near the grand piano, accepting embraces and handshakes. Compliments came in waves. "Dorothy, you've inspired us all." "Dorothy, what will you do next?" I laughed, but each laugh carried weight. My eyes, trained from years of reading body language in boardrooms, scanned the room and settled again on Mark. The details of the party still live vividly in my memory. The smell of roasted lamb from the kitchen, the gleam of polished silverware, the faint sound of a jazz quartet tucked into the corner. People raised glasses, toasted to my new chapter, and congratulated me on my success. I smiled, grateful for their words, yet my attention returned again and again to Mark. He was polite, even charming, but his jaw was tight, his shoulders stiff. Rachel's laughter rang out, higher pitched than usual. She guided guests toward the buffet table, but I caught her glancing at me when she thought I wasn't looking. It was subtle, but mothers notice the things others miss. Her smile faltered too quickly. Her hand squeezed Mark's arm a little too long. Something lived beneath the surface of their perfect performance. I had spent a lifetime surviving storms, personal and professional. That night should have been calm waters at last. Yet as I watched Mark move toward the wine table, a chill brushed my spine. His face showed determination masked by courtesy, his hands clumsy, though he tried to steady them. And I thought to myself, perhaps tonight will not be only about celebration. Perhaps tonight is about something else entirely. That was how the evening began. A house full of joy, a table set for honor, and a glance across the room that told me danger had found its way into my retirement party. I was standing near the piano when an old friend from the financial world walked up to me, holding out his hand with a wide smile. Out of courtesy, I turned away from the wine table, leaving my glass behind. We exchanged pleasantries. He congratulated me on the sale of my company, and I thanked him with the practiced warmth of someone used to celebrating victories in public. Yet even as I spoke, my eyes drifted past his shoulder, back to the wine table where my son-in-law stood. Mark's posture was tense. He held a bottle of red wine, the neck tilted carefully over a single glass. It was my glass, the one I always used at gatherings, chipped near the rim from years of being handled. I saw his fingers twitch, the liquid trembling as it left the bottle. His eyes darted across the room, scanning the crowd like a thief in a jewelry store. He thought no one was watching, but I was. My friend went on about golf, about retirement plans, about trips to Florida, and I nodded at the right places. Inside, though, my mind was no longer on him. It was fixed entirely on Mark. His hand shook as he returned the bottle to the table. Then, with forced calm, he set the glass down exactly where I would reach for it. He adjusted the stem, aligning it as if nothing unusual had happened. I knew then that something had been slipped into my drink. What it was, I could not say, but the way his knuckles whitened as he placed it there told me enough. He was not serving me out of kindness. He was setting a trap. I thanked my friend and excused myself, stepping back toward the table with deliberate slowness. Rachel was across the room, her laughter too sharp, too strained. Her eyes flicked from me to Mark, then away again. She knew something. Maybe not everything, but enough to betray her silence. I reached the table just as Mark moved away, pretending to adjust the placement of hors d'oeuvres. My glass waited, the small chip in the rim catching the light. I lifted it with a steady hand and a polite smile for anyone watching, but inside, I was steel. At that moment, Linda, his mother, stood nearby, chatting with another guest. She looked absent-minded, her hand empty. Without hesitation, I set my glass down beside her purse. I turned, greeted another neighbor, and shifted the glass toward Linda, with the ease of someone accustomed to sleight of hand in negotiations. She reached for it, distracted, and lifted it to her lips. She did not question it. Why would she? It was a party. The music swelled as the quartet began another song. Guests gathered near the center of the room, preparing for a toast. Rachel moved closer to me, forcing a smile. Mark lingered near the edge, his eyes flicking to the glass now in his mother's hand. He did not notice the switch. He believed his plan was intact. I raised another glass handed to me by a passing server, nodded to the crowd, and waited. My heart was calm, my breath even, but my mind was sharp as a blade. 5 minutes later, Linda's voice cut through the music. It was a choking sound, not words, a raw cry that silenced the room. Her body convulsed, her face twisted in pain. The glass slipped from her hand and shattered against the marble floor. She fell backward, her arms flailing, and then collapsed. The music stopped instantly. Gasps filled the air. People screamed. Chairs scraped against the floor as guests rushed to her side. I stood perfectly still, watching chaos unfold around me. I felt no surprise. I had seen it coming. Mark was at her side in seconds, clutching her shoulders, shouting her name with forced panic. "Mom! Somebody call an ambulance!" His voice carried the right notes of fear, but his eyes betrayed him. For a fraction of a second, they locked with mine. He knew. He knew I had seen. Rachel rushed forward too, shrieking, her hands fluttering uselessly. She turned to me, wide-eyed, tears already streaming. "Oh my God, Mom, what's happening?" The words sounded frantic, but her glance toward Mark was enough to betray complicity. Guests shouted for help, some fumbling with their phones, others running toward the door to flag down emergency services. The quartet sat frozen, instruments lowered, their faces pale. The party that had been filled with warmth only minutes earlier now pulsed with dread. I knelt beside Linda as foam collected at the corners of her mouth. She struggled for air, her body jerking violently. People pressed in closer, but I pushed them back. "Give her space," I commanded, my voice calm, almost clinical. Years of leading under pressure had taught me how to take control when others faltered. I held Linda's hand, steadying her as best I could. Mark's performance was convincing to the untrained eye. His face was pale, his voice cracked, his hands trembled as he patted her shoulder. But I saw through it. He was not grieving. He was calculating. Paramedics burst through the door within minutes. They pushed the crowd aside, their voices sharp, issuing commands. I stepped back, allowing them to work. The room was silent except for Linda's ragged breaths and the paramedics' clipped instructions. Guests whispered, some praying, others crying softly. The sense of celebration had been obliterated. As they lifted Linda onto a stretcher, I noticed Mark's eyes again. He stood rigid, his mouth tight, his phone buzzing in his pocket. He did not answer it. Rachel clung to him sobbing, but her sobs were too quick, too rehearsed. I recognized the performance. The paramedics asked, "Family?" Mark spoke immediately, "I'm her son." Rachel added quickly, "I'm her daughter-in-law." They both avoided my eyes. "I'll follow in my own car," I said firmly, when the paramedics asked if I would accompany them. Mark turned sharply. "No, Mom, you should stay here. We'll handle everything." His voice was smooth, too smooth. I looked at him, letting silence stretch between us. Then I answered, "Nonsense. She is family. I will come." The stretcher moved through the front door, and the sound of sirens filled the night. Guests murmured in shock, clustering together, their once bright faces now etched with fear. The house smelled of spilled wine and broken trust. I stood at the center of it all, calm and unshaken. I knew what I had witnessed. I knew who had intended that glass for me, and I knew that this night, which began as my retirement celebration, had now become the first battle in a far greater war. The party ended in chaos, and the music never returned. Guests left quickly, whispering, while the paramedics wheeled Linda through the door. I followed the flashing lights to the hospital in Queens, where sterile corridors replaced chandeliers, and the scent of antiseptic replaced the perfume of fine wine. The celebration of my life's work had collapsed into something far darker. At the admissions desk, Rachel's sobs carried down the hall. Her body shook against Mark's chest as though she were a child again, but her tears fell too easily, too perfectly. I watched them from a distance, my hands folded calmly in front of me. The doctor approached, his expression grave. "She is stable for now," he said, "but the tests suggest poisoning, plant alkaloids. This was not an accident." Rachel cried louder. "Poison? How could that happen? She only had wine." Her hands clutched her hair as if tearing it out would prove her grief was real. Mark leaned forward, his voice firm but trembling at the edges. "Doctor, there must be some mistake. My mother is careful. She takes vitamins, nothing dangerous. Could it have been spoiled wine?" His tone carried urgency, but his eyes flicked briefly to me, then away. It was the kind of glance a guilty man gives when he knows one person in the room has already seen through him. I said nothing. Silence can be sharper than accusation. The doctor shook his head. "This was deliberate. We are sending her blood to toxicology, but oleander is my suspicion. It mimics heart failure, common in the elderly. Whoever administered it knew what they were doing." Rachel collapsed into a chair, face buried in her hands. Mark gripped the doctor's sleeve. "Please do everything you can. She is all I have left." His words rang hollow, performed for the audience around him. The nurse wheeled Linda past us on a gurney. She was pale, eyes closed, chest rising shallowly beneath the sheets. I stepped closer, touched her hand briefly, and whispered so no one else could hear. "You drank what was meant for me." Rachel's voice broke through. "Mom, this is horrible. Who would hurt her? Who would want this?" She turned toward me, searching my face, but not for comfort. She was testing me. Did I suspect? Would I speak? I met her gaze without blinking. "I suppose we will find out," I said evenly. My voice carried the weight of certainty, though I left the words open. Her lips trembled, and she turned away. Hours passed in the waiting room. Guests had gone home. Only the three of us remained, joined by silence broken only by the buzz of fluorescent lights. Mark scrolled his phone, refusing calls, his leg bouncing uncontrollably. Rachel whispered prayers, dabbing her eyes with tissues. I sat still, back straight, watching everything. At one point, Mark muttered, "She has to recover. She will recover." His hand clenched into a fist, the veins on his wrist visible. He did not speak to me, but the words hung in the air like a warning. If Linda survived, questions would follow. Rachel tried to shift the focus. Mom, you should not have come here. It is too much stress for you. We will stay with her tonight. You go home and rest. I looked directly at her. She is family. I will not leave. The firmness of my tone made her flinch. The doctor returned near dawn. She is stable. The poison is working out of her system, but she will need observation. She will not remember much. That is common with this toxin. We will keep her sedated. Rachel exhaled dramatically, pressing her hand to her chest. Thank God. She is going to be fine. Mark nodded quickly, too quickly. Yes, thank God. Then his eyes cut to me again, measuring. I spoke calmly. Fortunate, isn't it, that she only drank a little, a few more sips, and the outcome would have been different. I let the words hang between us. Rachel's body stiffened, and Mark's jaw tightened. No one replied. We left the hospital together, stepping into the gray morning light. Mark turned to me, his tone softer, almost pleading. Mom, after all this, I think you should stay with us tonight. You should not be alone. What if something happens to you too? How thoughtful, I thought, to keep me close, under watch, where control would be easier. I smiled faintly. I have security at my house. I will be fine. Rachel forced a laugh. Yes, but you could use company. We are family. I leaned close enough for only them to hear. Family does not put poison in a glass. Their faces drained of color. I did not wait for a response. I walked to my car and drove home. The silence of the road was broken only by my thoughts. I knew the truth. Linda had not been the target. I was. My own daughter and her husband had stood in my home, surrounded by my friends, and tried to erase me from their future. They had chosen greed over blood, desperation over love. Yet I also knew patience was my ally. Shouting accusations would yield nothing but denial. Evidence would speak louder than outrage. I had survived 70 years by knowing when to strike and when to wait. Tonight, I would wait. Back in my study, I poured a glass of untouched wine from a fresh bottle. The house was still, the night's echoes lingering in the air. I sat at my desk, opened a leather-bound notebook, and began to write. Every glance, every tremor of Mark's hand, every flicker of Rachel's eyes, I recorded it all. This was no longer a retirement party. It was a battlefield, and I had just seen the enemy reveal his face. When I returned home after the hospital, the silence of my house felt heavier than ever. The party decorations still clung to the corners, empty glasses abandoned on the tables, and the faint smell of spilled wine lingered on the floor. I sat in the living room, where only hours before laughter had filled the air. Now it was empty, and my thoughts circled back to the single motion of my hand sliding that glass toward Linda. One small decision had saved my life and nearly ended hers. I exhaled slowly, my chest tight. It was not guilt I felt, but recognition of how thin the line was between chance and fate. I leaned back in my chair and whispered to myself, "She took what was meant for me." The weight of those words settled like iron in my stomach. Linda was innocent, a woman who depended on her son, a woman who had not asked to be caught in the web of deceit he had spun. And yet, she had been the one writhing on the marble floor. I told myself that sympathy would not blind me. Her suffering was real, but the real target had been me. Days later, Rachel invited me to dinner at their home. I went, not because I trusted them, but because observing people is easiest when they believe they are in control. The table was set with effort, roast chicken, green beans, wine, but the air was tight with unspoken tension. Mark pulled out Rachel's chair like a dutiful husband, his hand resting on her shoulder with exaggerated tenderness. Rachel reached for my hand as we sat down. "Mom," she said, her voice low, "what happened at the party was just a horrible accident. No one could have known. Linda is strong. She'll recover. Please, don't let it shadow your retirement." Mark chimed in quickly, his tone wrapped in concern. "Yes, Mom, I feel terrible about it. I've hardly slept. You deserve peace, not more stress." His words were polished, his face softened into the perfect mask of a caring son-in-law. But his eyes betrayed him. They shifted away from mine each time they met, like a man afraid of what he might see reflected back. I cut a piece of chicken and nodded slowly, saying nothing. Their words washed over me like rehearsed lines from a play I had already seen too many times. They wanted me calm, distracted, forgiving. They wanted me blind. "Mom," Rachel continued, squeezing my hand, "we just want you to be happy, that's all." I placed my fork down and met her gaze. "Happiness," I said evenly, "is knowing the truth of the people closest to you." Her face froze for a fraction of a second before she smiled again, too quickly. I let the silence stretch, then lifted my fork and returned to my meal. Sometimes silence says more than accusation ever could. After dinner, Mark offered to pour me a drink. I declined without hesitation. His hand lingered over the bottle just long enough to confirm my instincts. He smiled faintly, but there was irritation in the set of his jaw. He wanted me to drink. He wanted me to lower my guard. I would not. When I returned home, I pulled out a small leather notebook and placed it on my desk. For the first time in years, I wrote not about business, not about investments, but about survival. I listed everything: the glass at the party, Mark's trembling hands, Rachel's nervous glances, Linda's collapse, and the performance of grief in the hospital. I wrote it all, each detail sharp, deliberate. This notebook would be my record, my shield. From that night on, I observed them with new eyes. Every phone call, every visit, every word held weight. Rachel's voice carried the strain of someone torn between love for her mother and loyalty to her husband. Mark's gestures grew more careful, more polished, but beneath them I saw cracks. The pressure of his debts, the desperation to maintain appearances, the hunger for what was not his, it seeped through. At times, Rachel tried to distract me with affection. She asked about old memories, laughed about childhood stories, and kissed my cheek more than usual. But it was not warmth, it was camouflage. Each smile was a veil, each laugh a diversion. Mark, on the other hand, grew more controlling. He offered to fix things around my house, insisted on driving me to appointments, and called more often than he ever had in years. It was not care. It was surveillance. He wanted proximity. He wanted to measure how much I knew. I never confronted them directly. I nodded. I thanked them. I played the role of the aging mother they believed they could outsmart. But every time I closed my door, I returned to my notebook. I added times, dates, exact words. My notes became sharper than any blade. One evening, as I wrote by the lamplight, I thought of Linda lying unconscious in the hospital bed. She was not part of their scheme, but she had been forced into it by accident. She, too, had become a victim of the very son she trusted. For that, I felt something deeper than anger. I felt resolve. I closed the notebook and placed it in the drawer of my desk, locking it with a key. Then I whispered to myself, "You tried to kill me once. You will not get another chance." That was the true aftermath of the party. Not grief, not confusion, but clarity. From that night forward, I no longer moved as a mother celebrating her retirement. Rachel came to see me alone a few days after the dinner. She arrived without Mark, which was unusual. Her eyes were red, as though she had cried before walking through my door, but her face was carefully composed. I set tea on the table, and we sat across from one another in the quiet of my kitchen. For a long moment she said nothing. Her fingers traced the rim of the cup, her breath shallow. Finally, she spoke. "Mom," she began, her voice soft, "you should think about the future. You are 70 now. Managing so much money by yourself is not easy. It could overwhelm you." I let the words hang in the air. The phrasing was gentle, but the message was sharp. She was not asking. She was pressing. I studied her face, the way her jaw clenched even as her eyes tried to look pleading. Behind her concern, I saw something else. Fear. Not fear for me, but fear of what would happen if she did not convince me. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands. "Do you believe I cannot handle it?" My tone was calm but unyielding. Rachel flinched slightly. That is not what I mean. I want you safe. Mark and I have talked. We think it might be better if someone helped you manage things, just so there are no mistakes. The word mistakes tasted bitter to me. I had built a company from the ground up, survived recessions, buried a husband, raised a child, and turned nothing into $20 million. And now my own daughter sat in my kitchen, suggesting I was no longer capable. I watched her closely. "You have been talking with Mark." Her lips parted, then closed. She looked down at her tea. "He just worries. He thinks about what could happen if something went wrong, if you were scammed, if you forgot something important. It happens to people our age, Mom. You have to admit that." Our age. She was nearly 4 decades younger than me, yet she said it as though we shared the same fragility. I felt the sting of her words, but I saw the weakness behind them. Rachel was not leading this charge. She was repeating Mark's script. I said nothing, and in that silence she grew restless. Her fingers tapped the porcelain cup. "I just do not want to see you hurt, or alone." Her voice cracked, and for a moment I glimpsed the girl she once was, a child who clung to me when the world seemed too large. But that moment faded quickly, replaced by the shadow of Mark's influence. "You want me to sign something?" I said evenly. Her head snapped up. "No, not yet. I mean, maybe. Just something small, to take the weight off you." I smiled faintly. "Rachel, tell me the truth. Whose idea was this?" Her face crumpled slightly, her shoulders sagging. "Mark thinks—" She caught herself, corrected. "We think it would be safer this way." There it was. The truth slipped through despite her attempt to disguise it. I had no doubt that at home, conversations were filled with calculations, with Mark's voice loud and certain, and Rachel's voice soft, hesitant, agreeing even when her heart resisted. I leaned forward, meeting her eyes. "Do you know what safety looks like to me? It looks like freedom, the freedom to make my own choices, the freedom not to be cornered into decisions by people who claim to love me." Rachel's eyes filled with tears, but they were not the tears of guilt. They were tears of conflict, torn between the mother she once depended on and the husband who now dictated her future. She reached across the table, grasping my hand. "Mom, please. You are making this harder than it needs to be. We just want what is best." I did not pull my hand away, but my grip remained cold. "Best for whom?" Her silence was answer enough. She left not long after, her excuses weak, her hug stiff. I stood at the window as she walked down the driveway, her shoulders hunched, her steps uneven. She was not cruel by nature, but weakness can be as dangerous as malice when guided by the wrong hands. That night, I opened my notebook again. I wrote every word she had said, every tremor in her voice, every slip of truth. I wrote of the way she shifted blame to Mark, then tried to claim unity. I wrote of the way she avoided my gaze when pressed too hard. As the pen scratched across the page, I realized the truth that cut deeper than the poison in that glass. My daughter was not entirely my enemy, but she was not my ally either. She had chosen the path of least resistance, and that path was Mark's. I closed the notebook and whispered to myself, "She is gray, but gray can still turn black if pushed far enough." From that day on, I no longer saw Rachel as simply my daughter. I saw her as part of a pair, bound by fear and greed. And though I loved her, I would not allow her weakness to be my undoing. The rift between us had opened quietly, almost invisibly. But I knew it would widen, and when it did, I would be ready. I had spent a lifetime reviewing balance sheets, dissecting numbers, and recognizing patterns. Those instincts had not dulled with age. If anything, they had sharpened. After the dinner with Rachel, I decided it was time to dig. If Mark and Rachel were desperate enough to poison me, then there had to be financial shadows trailing them. People rarely risk everything unless the ground beneath their feet is collapsing. I began quietly. A few discreet calls to old contacts in banking. A request for public filings on Mark's construction company. Nothing illegal, just the kind of careful inquiry a woman of my background could still manage with a single phone call. Within a week, the picture came together, and it was darker than I anticipated. Mark's construction company was bleeding. Projects had failed, contracts dissolved, lawsuits hovered. They were nearly $400,000 in debt, with creditors circling. Worse, the house they flaunted in Westchester, the grand stone front with manicured lawns and 2 imported cars in the driveway, was no fortress. It had been refinanced twice, equity drained each time to keep them afloat. The walls of their palace were built on sand. I sat at my kitchen table with the papers spread before me. My chest did not tighten with shock. Instead, a calm certainty settled in. Desperation was their motive. They were cornered animals, willing to bare their teeth to survive. But survival to them meant stealing from me, the very person who had carried Rachel through her childhood and sacrificed to build a life they now dismissed as outdated. I scheduled an appointment with David Hartwell, my attorney. He was a man of precision, and in 20 years he had never once wasted my time. When I walked into his office, the polished oak and scent of leather-bound books steadied me. David stood, shook my hand, and gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. "Dorothy," he said with concern, "what have you uncovered?" I placed the documents in front of him, each page like a weapon laid on the table. "Mark's company is collapsing. They owe close to $400,000. Their house is mortgaged beyond reason. And—" I paused, my voice cold. "There is more." David scanned the pages, his brow furrowing. "This is worse than I imagined." I pulled the final folder from my bag. I had a contact at an insurance firm check recent filings. 2 months ago, a life insurance policy was taken out in my name. $500,000. Beneficiary, Rachel Miller. David's head snapped up. His usually calm features sharpened. "Rachel is the beneficiary?" "Yes, not Mark. Rachel." He exhaled slowly, tapping the page with his pen. "Dorothy, this is not an accident. This is a layered plan. The poisoning wasn't the end. It was the beginning. If that failed, the policy would ensure profit regardless. And with Rachel as the beneficiary, it masks Mark's hand." I nodded. My voice clipped. "It means they anticipated failure. They prepared for contingencies. My death, whether sudden or explained away by age, was not left to chance." David leaned back in his chair, studying me. "You understand what this means, don't you? They are not merely reckless. They are organized. You are not facing a moment of weakness. You are facing strategy." I held his gaze. "Then we respond with strategy." His lips curved slightly, a grim smile. "What do you want to do?" "I want to watch them. I want to collect everything. Their words, their movements, their patterns. I want enough evidence so that when this house of cards falls, it buries them, not me." David nodded. "Then we will build your defense like a fortress. Begin documenting every interaction. I will prepare trust structures. If they try again, legally or otherwise, we will be ready." As I left his office, I felt no fear. Fear was what they expected of me. Instead, I felt something stronger, clarity. They had exposed their hand, and now it was my turn to play mine. That evening, Rachel called. Her voice trembled with false sweetness. "Mom, I just wanted to check on you. How are you feeling after everything?" "I am fine," I said evenly. "Mark and I were thinking, maybe you should come stay with us for a while. You know, after what happened to Mom. It might be safer." Her choice of words struck me. Safer. Safer from what? From them? "Rachel," I replied, "safety is something I know how to manage. Thank you, but I'm fine in my own home." There was silence, then a quick laugh. "Of course. I just worry." I ended the call, wrote down every word in my notebook, and underlined one phrase twice. It might be safer. That night, as the house settled into quiet, I stared at the ceiling and thought about the layers of their plot. The poisoning had been bold but sloppy. The insurance policy was clean, legal, and hidden. The debts explained their urgency. It was all connected. I whispered to myself, "They will try again, but so will I." And in that moment, I no longer saw myself as prey. I was the hunter waiting in the shadows, recording every step of theirs until the trap closed. Emma arrived on a Saturday afternoon, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her eyes shifting nervously as she stepped into my house. 16 years old, and sharper than most adults, but still carrying the fragility of youth. I welcomed her with a smile and tea, but I noticed her hesitation. She looked around as though expecting someone to appear from the shadows. We sat in the living room, sunlight stretching across the carpet. For a while she spoke about school, friends, and how heavy her assignments felt. I listened, nodding, until her words began to falter. Her fingers twisted in her lap, and she avoided my eyes. Finally she whispered, "Grandma, I heard Mom and Dad talking the other night." My hand paused on my teacup. "What did you hear, Emma?" Her voice cracked with the weight of the secret. "They were on the phone with some doctor, a psychiatrist, I think. They said they wanted him to prove you're not really clear anymore, that you're losing it." The words struck like ice in my veins. I had braced myself for poison, for deceit, for financial schemes, but this, an attack on my mind, my competence, was a cruelty I had not fully anticipated. Emma's eyes brimmed with tears. "Grandma, I don't believe them. You're the smartest person I know. But they said if the doctor writes something down, no one will question it. They said it's the fastest way to make sure they can take care of everything." I reached across the table, smoothing her hair with my hand. My voice was steady, though rage churned inside me. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I will protect myself. You don't need to carry their secrets alone." She clung to me, and for the first time since the party, I felt a glimmer of light. Emma was not corrupted by their greed. She was innocent, but also brave enough to tell me the truth. That made her my ally. After she left, I sat alone, replaying her words. A psychiatrist, a fabricated diagnosis. They were not only planning my death, they were planning my erasure. If the poison failed, they would declare me incompetent, strip me of control, and lock me away where my voice could no longer be heard. The next week, I began to investigate quietly. I visited 3 hospitals in Queens and Manhattan, posing as an ordinary patient seeking information. I asked about psychiatric records, evaluations, anything with my name attached. Most nurses looked puzzled, flipping through databases with nothing to report. But at the 4th hospital, the clerk frowned. "Dorothy Miller?" she asked, typing into her computer. "Yes, there's a record here. A preliminary assessment requested by Dr. Richard Steinberg. Notes say, suspected early dementia, but it's not signed by you. It was submitted by family." My throat tightened. I asked, "May I see who authorized it?" She glanced around, lowered her voice, and turned the monitor slightly. "Listed as next of kin, Mark Peterson. He provided supporting information. Forgetfulness, poor judgment, paranoia, enough to justify further evaluation." For a moment the room seemed to tilt. My own son-in-law had placed false accusations in my file. A narrative was being built behind my back, one that painted me as unfit to handle my affairs. I straightened, masking the fury in my chest. "Thank you," I said calmly. "That is all I needed." Walking out of that hospital, I felt the cold wind cut across my face. The game had shifted. No longer just poison in a glass, it was poison on paper. And that paper could be more lethal than any vial hidden in a purse. That night, I called David, my attorney. His voice was steady as always, but I could hear the sharp edge of alarm when I told him. "They are building a competency case," he said. "Dorothy, you must understand, if Steinberg files a report, courts will listen. Guardianship could be established. They'd have complete control." I gripped the phone tightly. "They will not win. I'll make sure of it." David's tone hardened. "Then we document your mental clarity immediately. I'll schedule an independent evaluation, and we gather every shred of evidence about Mark's interference." I hung up and sat in silence. Emma's frightened eyes came back to me. She had given me the key, the warning before the storm. I could not let her down. Later that week, Emma visited again. She carried her phone nervously, as though she wanted to show me something but feared the weight of it. Finally, she unlocked it and slid it across the table. "I recorded them, Grandma, the night I heard them. It's not much, but—" I pressed play. Mark's voice was low but clear. "Once Steinberg signs off, it's done. She won't fight. She won't be able to." Rachel's voice followed, hesitant. "But she's still fine, Mark. People will notice." "She's 70, Mark snapped. "No one will question it. All we need is the report." The recording ended, but the evidence was enough to freeze my blood. Emma watched me, afraid she had gone too far. I reached for her hand. "You've done more than enough, sweetheart. You've given me exactly what I need." She looked at me, her voice small. "You'll be okay, right?" I smiled, though my heart was heavy. I've survived worse, and I'm not about to let anyone write the end of my story for me. That night, I locked Emma's recording in my desk beside my notebook. Together, they were no longer just words and suspicions. They were proof. Proof that Mark and Rachel were not only after my fortune, but also my identity. As I turned off the light, I whispered into the darkness, "You tried to take my life. Now you're trying to take my mind. But you forgot who taught you how to play the game." Linda came to my house one late afternoon, a wool scarf wrapped tightly around her shoulders even though the air was mild. Her face was pale, thinner than before, her steps careful, as if every movement reminded her that she had brushed against death. I welcomed her inside, guiding her to the living room where the fire was low and steady. She sat on the sofa, clutching her handbag with both hands as though it anchored her. For a while, we spoke of ordinary things. She asked about my garden, and I told her the roses were late this season. I asked about her recovery, and she said the doctors had warned her to rest, though she confessed she had trouble sleeping. There was a hesitancy in her words, a fragility I had never seen in her before. She sipped her tea with trembling hands, her eyes darting between the cup and the carpet. Then she sighed, heavy and low. "Dorothy, I still remember that night, the music, the laughter, then the taste of the wine. Bitter, wrong. And after that, nothing until I woke in the hospital. I cannot stop thinking about it." I kept my voice calm, steady. "Trauma leaves its mark, Linda, but you are alive. That is what matters." Her eyes filled with tears. "Alive because of chance. That glass should not have been mine. It was yours, wasn't it?" I looked at her, and the silence stretched between us. She swallowed hard, her voice breaking. "Dorothy, I drank from your glass. My son, my own son. What did he do?" I set my cup down deliberately. "Linda, let me ask you instead, why do you think he would do something like that?" Her face crumpled. She shook her head violently, then covered her mouth with both hands as if to hold back a scream. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "He is my boy. I raised him. I worked myself raw to make sure he had a future. I gave him everything I could. How could he repay me with this?" I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "Greed twists people, Linda. Debt, desperation, envy, they blind the soul. But you know your son better than I ever could. Tell me, why is he capable of this?" She pressed her hands into her lap, staring at the floor as though the truth lay hidden in the carpet. Finally, she whispered, "Because he cannot stand to lose. Because he sees your success and feels small beside it. Because Rachel follows his lead and he believes he deserves what you built." Her words broke like glass in the air, sharp and unavoidable. I reached for her hand. "Then you understand why I cannot afford to ignore what happened. He will try again, not just with me. He has already endangered you. The next time, it may not be an accident that you are in the way." Linda's shoulders shook. She looked at me with a pain I could not fully imagine. "Dorothy, what do you want me to do? He is my son, my flesh and blood." I held her gaze. "And Rachel is mine. We are mothers. But there comes a time when loving them blindly becomes a weapon they use against us. The question is, Will we stand by and watch them destroy everything, or will we protect what we must? Her silence was long, but her eyes spoke of the storm inside her. At last, she nodded faintly. I do not know if I am strong enough to stand against him, but I know this. I cannot pretend anymore. I saw what I saw. I tasted that wine. I remember the bitterness, and I know he put it there. That admission was enough. Not an alliance signed with words, but an understanding carved from grief. Two mothers, betrayed by their own children, finding solidarity in the quiet ruin left behind. I squeezed her hand gently. Linda, you may not think you are strong, but you have already survived what should have killed you. That is strength enough. When the time comes, I will need you to speak the truth. Not for me, not even for yourself, but for justice. She wiped her eyes with a crumpled tissue, her voice steadier than before. I will. I cannot cover for him anymore. He crossed a line I cannot follow. The room fell into silence, except for the crackle of the fire. We sat together, two women on opposite sides of a terrible scheme, yet bound now by something stronger than family ties, the will to survive. When she left, her steps were still slow, but there was new resolve in her posture. I watched her walk down my path and thought, she is no longer just his mother. She is a witness, perhaps even an ally. That night, I wrote in my notebook, Linda remembers, she knows, and she will not protect him forever. I closed the book, my mind sharpened by the realization that what began as a private war was slowly turning into something larger. The pieces were aligning, and with Linda at my side, even quietly, the truth was no longer mine alone to carry. The pressure came slowly at first, like water rising around my ankles. Then before long, it was flooding my home. Mark and Rachel began their campaign with polite suggestions, then escalated to subtle threats hidden inside their smiles. Every conversation ended in the same place, Sunrise Manor. One evening, Rachel arrived carrying brochures. She placed them on my dining table as if they were gifts. "Mom, look at this," she said gently. Her voice trembled with rehearsed affection. "It's more like a resort than a nursing home. They have a spa, a golf course, beautiful walking gardens. You'd love it there." I ran my fingers across the glossy images. Elderly couples smiling over bridge games, women in pastel sweaters stretching in water aerobics, men lined up on the green, swinging clubs under the sun, all carefully staged illusions. Behind those smiles, I saw the truth: isolation, silence, and a slow fading into irrelevance. "I like my home," I replied simply. Rachel's smile stiffened. "But Mom, this house is too big. Too many stairs. What if you fall? What if something happens and no one finds you for hours?" Her words were scripted. I had heard them before, but never so pointed. Mark, seated across from me, leaned in with his practiced earnestness. Sunrise Manor isn't about losing independence. It's about safety. It's about peace of mind. Rachel and I worry about you constantly. We can't always be here. I kept my tone measured. Peace of mind for whom? For me or for you? Rachel looked wounded, but I saw her glance sideways at her husband. He gave her a subtle nod, as if coaching her through a performance. "Mom," she whispered, her eyes shiny with tears. "Please, don't make this harder than it has to be. You need professional care. You need someone who can look after you." Professional care. The phrase rang cold. They had already laid the groundwork with Steinberg, the psychiatrist. The nursing home was not for my benefit. It was a cage dressed in flowers. I folded the brochure and set it back on the table. "I will think about it," I said. Mark leaned back, his eyes narrowing just slightly. "We don't have much time to think. Sunrise Manor has a waiting list. If we act quickly, we can secure you a place. Otherwise, we may lose the chance." So there it was, the urgency, the noose tightening. That night, alone in my study, I opened my notebook and wrote, "They are escalating. Rachel has surrendered completely. Mark controls her words. The plan is accelerating." Days later, Rachel arrived again, this time without Mark. She carried a stack of papers in a leather folder. She looked tired, her hair hastily tied back, her hands trembling as she set the folder before me. "Mom," she began softly, "I need you to sign these. It's just routine paperwork, power of attorney. In case something happens, we can make decisions quickly, for your benefit." I opened the folder. The words leapt at me. Full legal authority, irrevocable financial control, healthcare decision-making rights. It was a legal surrender, my life reduced to signatures on a page. Rachel reached across the table, gripping my hand. Her eyes filled with desperation. "Please, Mom, don't fight us on this. We only want to help. You don't know how hard it is to watch you take risks with your health and your money. You deserve rest." Her words might have touched me if I didn't already know the truth. But I did. I knew about their debts, their mortgages, the insurance policy. And now I saw the weakness in her eyes, the way she spoke not from conviction, but from fear. She was no longer my daughter standing before me. She was Mark's echo. I squeezed her hand gently, masking my anger. "I appreciate your concern, but something like this cannot be rushed. Give me time." She looked at me with trembling lips. "Mark said you'd say that?" I tilted my head. "Did he? Then perhaps Mark should be here himself, instead of sending you to plead his case." Her eyes widened with hurt. "Don't put this all on him. I want this too." I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "Do you? Or are you just afraid of what will happen if you don't?" Rachel's breath caught, and tears slid down her cheeks. For a moment, I saw the little girl she once was, lost and pressured, clinging to approval. Then she gathered herself, wiped her tears, and stood. "Think about it," she said coldly, "but not too long. We can't wait forever." When the door closed behind her, the silence of my home pressed against me. They were cornering me, tightening their grip, playing their roles. Rachel as the grieving, concerned daughter, Mark as the steady hand guiding the family, and me in their narrative as the fading matriarch too blind to see reality. But their performance was flawed. They had underestimated the audience. I turned back to my notebook and wrote again. "The pressure rises. The trap is closing. But I am not stepping into it. Not yet." Each night, as I locked my doors and checked the new security system, I felt the air grow heavier. Dinner conversations with Rachel became unbearable, Mark's presence suffocating. I endured it all, patient, watchful, waiting for the exact moment when their scheme would collapse under its own weight. Because that moment always comes, and when it does, I will be ready. It was close to midnight when the doorbell rang. The house was silent. Every shadow stretched long across the walls. I hesitated before opening the door, but when I did, Mark and Rachel stood there. Rachel's face was pale, tense, her voice too cheerful. "Mom, we were just driving by. Thought we'd stop in." I let them in, though every instinct screamed against it. Rachel slipped quickly into the kitchen, saying she would make tea. Mark lingered behind me, his footsteps heavy, as I climbed the first steps of the staircase. I could feel his eyes drilling into my back. "Dorothy," he said, his voice flat, strange. "You don't understand. At your age, with all that money, what's the point of holding on to it? 20 million, sitting with you, while Rachel and I break our backs trying to survive. We're the ones with responsibilities. We're the ones who need it." I stopped, turning slowly to face him. His features were darker than the dim light allowed, but I saw the anger etched across his face. "Mark," I said coldly, "if you truly cared about protecting this family, you wouldn't be thinking about killing me." His mouth curled into a bitter smile. Then he laughed, low, cruel, deliberate. "Who would believe you? An old woman in her 70s, confused, forgetful. People will think you imagined it. They'll say you're losing your mind." His words were blades, but it was the glint in his eyes that chilled me. I turned, ready to continue upstairs. That was when it came. A sudden shove. His palm slammed into my back with force. I felt the world tilt. My body pitched forward. The air split with the sound of my gasp as the stairs rose to meet me. In those seconds, my mind fractured. I heard phantom cracks of bone. I felt blood rush to my head, the sick certainty that my life was ending right there on the staircase I had walked for decades. But fate caught me. My arm hooked the railing. Instead of tumbling down to the bottom, I slid hard across 3 steps before stopping. Pain shot up my side, my arms bruised, my knees throbbing. But I was alive. Barely. Rachel's scream cut through the silence. "Oh my God, Mom!" She rushed forward, dropping the teacups she carried. Liquid splashed across the hardwood. "Mark, what did you do?" Mark froze, then shook his head quickly, his hands trembling in mock panic. I tried to catch her. She slipped. I was trying to stop her fall." I lay there, breath ragged, my chest heaving. My vision blurred, but not so much that I missed it. The way Rachel's eyes darted toward Mark, her expression one of controlled chaos. They were in this together. I forced myself to speak, voice steady despite the pain. "You think I fell, Mark? You think I don't know the difference between a slip and a push?" His face hardened, then quickly shifted back to feigned concern. "Dorothy, please don't say that. You're shaken." "You don't know what you're talking about." Rachel knelt beside me, putting her hand on mine. Her touch was cold. "Mom, please, don't move. We'll get you help." I pulled my hand away. "You'll get me help? Or you'll finish what you started?" Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. For a long moment, silence ruled the house. Only my labored breaths filled the space. Then I looked up, locking eyes with them both. "I may be old," I whispered, "but I am not blind, and I am not weak. Remember that." Mark stepped back, swallowing hard, his mask slipping. Rachel bit her lip, tears threatening to fall. I pushed myself upright, clinging to the railing. Pain surged through me, but I stood. The two of them just watched, shadows on their faces. In that instant, clarity struck me. They would not stop. Tonight had been a warning, a test. Next time, they would make sure there was no railing, no miracle to catch me. As I steadied myself at the top of the stairs, my heart pounded with both fear and fury. I thought, this is not over. If I do nothing, they will succeed. But if I strike first, they will never see it coming. From below, Mark's voice came again, quieter, darker. "You should be more careful, Dorothy. At your age, accidents happen all the time." I turned my head just enough for him to see the fire in my eyes. "And at your age, mistakes have consequences." That night, bruised and sore in my bed, I stared at the ceiling until dawn. I had nearly died in my own home. The betrayal was complete, but so was my resolve. They thought I was powerless. They thought I was one step from senility, one slip away from the grave. But I was still standing, and I would not wait for another shove to prove it. I understood it then. They would never stop. If I did not strike back, the next fall would not end with bruises. It would end with silence. That night, battered but unbroken, I made my decision. I picked up the phone and called David Hartwell, my attorney of 20 years. His calm, precise voice on the other end was the anchor I needed. "Dorothy," he said, after hearing the tremor in my tone. "What happened?" "David," I answered, steadying myself, "my family wants me gone. It is no longer suspicion. It is certainty. I need to secure my life, my assets, and my name. Tonight." He was silent for a moment. Then, with the decisiveness I had always trusted, he replied, "Come in tomorrow morning. We will rewrite everything." The next day, I sat across from him in his Manhattan office, the smell of polished leather and ink filling the room. He spread out documents with a deliberate hand. "First, the will," he said. "Mark and Rachel's share will be reduced to a modest annual trust. Enough to live, but never enough to destroy themselves with greed." "And the rest?" I asked. "To cancer research, scholarships, and your church. Your money will live on in ways they cannot touch." I signed each page with a clear, firm stroke. Every line was a shield, every signature a weapon. Then he slid another set of papers toward me. Charitable trusts. Irrevocable. They will limit access to your fortune. No one can override them unless you allow it. Even if someone claims incompetency, the assets are locked away. I felt the weight lift just slightly. Good. Let them try. They will find nothing but walls. When I returned home, I summoned a security company. By evening, men in uniforms were drilling into walls, mounting cameras above doorways, installing sensors on windows. I told the neighbors it was for package thefts. The truth was far darker. I wanted every movement recorded. If Mark or Rachel stepped foot inside my home with malice, the world would know. That night, I walked through my house watching the small red lights blink alive. A fortress, finally. I whispered to myself, "Let them come. I am ready now." But the most powerful weapon arrived in a different form. Emma, my granddaughter. She was 16, bright-eyed, far more observant than her parents realized. She began slipping me quiet messages, her thumbs quick on her phone under the dinner table. One afternoon, while Rachel pretended to help me fold laundry, Emma caught my eye and mouthed, "Later." That night, after her parents left, she came to my study. She slid her phone across the desk. "Grandma," she whispered, "I screenshotted their texts. Dad and Mom. They talk about Sunrise Manor like it is already decided, and—" She hesitated, fear flashing across her face. "Dad said to Mom, if she resists again, we make it final." My stomach turned, though my face stayed calm for Emma's sake. I took her hand, pressing it gently. "You are very brave, but from now on, let me carry the danger. You must stay safe." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to lose you, Grandma." "You won't," I promised, "because now it is my turn to move." From then on, Emma became my silent ally. She would leave small notes folded into her backpack straps, snippets of overheard conversations, screenshots of bank alerts from Rachel's phone. Piece by piece, the puzzle grew. One night, she whispered as she left, "Dad called the psychiatrist again. He said you need to be declared unstable before the paperwork." I nodded slowly. "Then it is time to gather proof. They will not see it coming." I began documenting everything. Every time Rachel pressed me to sign, every time Mark hovered too close, every glance, every whisper. Dates, times, exact words, all inked into my journal. I kept copies in a fireproof box and another set locked in David's office. I even saved the wine bottle from the retirement party. It sat sealed in my refrigerator, a sinister reminder of how close I had come. David arranged for it to be tested. The results were what I expected. Oleander extract, enough to kill in minutes. Standing in my kitchen, holding that report, I allowed myself the smallest smile. "Now," I murmured, "the game changes." Rachel came over again a few days later. She set her hand on mine, her voice trembling with false compassion. "Mom, please, you cannot live like this, all alone. It isn't safe." I looked her directly in the eyes, letting silence stretch. Then I said softly, "You are right, Rachel. It isn't safe. Not for me. Not for anyone who underestimates me." She blinked, unsettled. I could see doubt creep into her face, just for a moment. Mark wasn't there to steady her. She gathered her things quickly, muttering something about calling me tomorrow. When the door closed, I exhaled slowly. I knew then the tide had shifted. They had pushed me down the stairs, tried to poison me, plotted to lock me away. They believed I was vulnerable, that my age made me weak. But they had forgotten the truth. Age does not strip strength. Experience sharpens it. As I sat at my desk, Emma's last message lighting up my phone, I whispered, "It is my turn now." I sat at the dining room table, the same table where my late husband and I had once planned our future, and now it was covered in papers that were meant to strip me of mine. Mark leaned forward with the eagerness of a starving wolf, sliding the power of attorney form across to me. His voice was smooth, rehearsed, but I could hear the tremor beneath it. "Dorothy, This is just a formality. Sunrise Manor requires a clear line of responsibility. Once you sign, everything will be easier for you. No more worrying about bills or paperwork. Rachel and I will handle everything. You can finally rest." Rachel reached for my hand, her eyes wide, her voice dripping with false warmth. "Mom, please, think about how hard it has been since Dad died. You have carried everything alone. You deserve to be cared for now. Let us do this for you." I let my shoulders sag, allowing a weariness to wash over me that they wanted so desperately to see. My voice came out soft, almost fragile. Maybe you are right. I am tired. Perhaps it is time I stop resisting." Rachel squeezed my hand in delight, relief flashing across her face. Mark exhaled sharply, as though a boulder had been lifted from his chest. He leaned back in his chair, his smile crooked, triumphant. "Good," he said. "We will take care of everything. Sunrise Manor is beautiful. You will be safe there, with medical staff, with people your own age, and we will visit all the time." I nodded, forcing a smile that did not reach my eyes. "Of course. Just show me where to sign." I took the pen with a trembling hand, scrawled my name across the documents, and slid them back. Mark's eyes gleamed. Rachel nearly wept with joy. To them, the battle was won. "Thank you, Mom," Rachel whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You will not regret this." I answered with a simple, "I hope not." Inside, however, I was colder than ice. The real signature they had just celebrated was nothing but bait. David, my attorney, had prepared decoy documents, binding enough to convince them, but legally powerless. What they held was an illusion. The real power remained in my hands. For the next few days, I allowed myself to appear frail. I shuffled slower, sighed more often, and let them speak of Sunrise Manor as though it were already decided. Rachel busied herself packing boxes of my belongings, her hands almost trembling with anticipation as she wrapped up crystal glasses and family photos. Mark spent hours on the phone, making arrangements with the facility, assuring them the money would be wired soon. Every word, every action I recorded discreetly on the cameras hidden throughout my house. The microphones captured it all. Rachel's coaxing, Mark's boasts, their whispered arguments about how soon they would gain access to my accounts. But I was not only relying on technology, I had reached out to Linda. When she arrived, pale and still shaken from her brush with death, I welcomed her in with warmth she had not felt in months. "Linda," I said gently, pouring her tea, "we need to talk about that night. You remember the glass you drank?" Her hands trembled as she held the cup. "Dorothy, I know it wasn't meant for me. I remember Mark near the drinks. I thought maybe I imagined it, but no. He wanted you gone. My own son." I leaned closer, locking eyes with her. "Yes, he wanted me gone. But fate chose differently. You nearly died in my place." Tears welled in her eyes and her voice cracked. "How could he? After everything, I raised him better than this." "Greed blinds people," I said simply. "But you can help me stop him. You can help me stop both of them." She nodded, slow but resolute. "Tell me what to do." That night, I also called Detective Morrison from the local police department. I explained only what was necessary: suspected poisoning, suspicious financial maneuvers, pressure to sign away control of my estate. She listened carefully, then said, "Mrs. Miller, if you want to catch them, we will need proof, not just words, proof strong enough to hold in court." "I will give you proof," I replied, my tone steady, "but you must be ready when I call." "Then call me the moment you have it," she said firmly. The trap was set. A week later, Mark and Rachel returned, carrying folders, laptops, and a look of smug satisfaction. Rachel kissed my cheek, her voice sickly sweet. "Mom, we are almost done. Sunrise Manor has accepted your paperwork. They are just waiting for the transfer of funds." Mark opened his briefcase with a flourish. "Here are the final forms. Once you initial these sections, we can wire the money today. They will have a suite ready for you by next week." I let my shoulders slump again, feigning surrender. "All right, dear, if you say it is best." Rachel's smile widened, tears sparkling in her eyes. Mark's pen scratched eagerly across the papers as he pointed out where I needed to sign. What they did not know was that my house was now live-wired with hidden feeds, streaming every word and gesture straight to the police. Linda sat quietly in the corner, watching her son with eyes filled with both grief and determination. Emma, upstairs in her room, was texting me updates about their whispered comments before they came into the living room. I placed the pen down after the final signature and whispered, almost too softly to hear, "There, it is done." Mark's grin was wolfish. Rachel hugged me tightly, murmuring, "Thank you, Mom. Thank you for trusting us." But as they basked in their false victory, my phone buzzed quietly in my pocket. One word appeared on the screen. "Ready." I leaned back in my chair, my expression carefully neutral. For once, I allowed them to see what they wanted to see, an old woman defeated, resigned to her fate. They did not realize they were already walking into the jaws of justice. As they packed up the documents and prepared to toast their supposed triumph, I glanced toward Linda. Her eyes met mine, and I gave her the slightest nod. She understood. The moment was near. The noose was tightening, and they had tied it themselves. The day of reckoning came dressed as an ordinary afternoon. My house smelled faintly of fresh coffee, the curtains drawn halfway, and on the table lay a mountain of documents, contracts, bank transfers, the so-called power of attorney. Mark and Rachel sat across from me, their faces gleaming with satisfaction. Rachel slid the pen into my hand as though it were a crown being placed upon her head. "Mom, this is the last step. After this, you won't have to worry about a single thing. We'll take care of it all." Mark leaned forward, his tone confident, almost mocking. "Just sign, Dorothy. Think of this as freedom. You'll thank us later." I studied their faces. Rachel's eager smile, tears brimming in her eyes as though this were an act of devotion. Mark's smug composure, his jaw set like a man who believed the war was already won. I let the silence stretch, then lowered my gaze to the papers. With steady hands, I signed my name. One stroke. Two. The last loop of my signature hung on the page. They exhaled in unison. Rachel clasped her hands over her mouth, overcome with relief. "Oh my God, Mom, you did it! You finally understand!" Mark chuckled darkly, leaning back in his chair. "That's it. We're done here." But as their laughter filled the room, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hall. The front door opened, and into the living room walked Detective Morrison, flanked by two uniformed officers. Behind them came David Hartwell, my attorney, briefcase in hand. Rachel froze, color draining from her face. Mark shot to his feet. "What is this? What are they doing here?" I placed the pen down gently, folded my hands, and leaned back into my chair. My voice was calm, but it cut sharper than any blade. "You forgot one thing. I've spent my entire life surrounded by greedy men. I learned to recognize them at first glance. Did you really think I wouldn't see you for what you are?" The room fell silent, except for the click of David opening his case. He pulled out folders, photographs, printed messages, and laid them one by one on the table. Detective Morrison stepped forward, her eyes never leaving Mark. "This is an active investigation," she said firmly. "Mr. Peterson, Mrs. Peterson, you need to listen carefully." Rachel shook her head wildly. "No, this is a mistake. Mom, tell them. You signed the papers." I cut her off with a raised hand. "The papers mean nothing. They were decoys prepared by my attorney. The only signatures here are a record of your desperation." Mark's face darkened. "You can't prove anything. None of this will hold up." David slid a clear plastic bag onto the table. Inside, the wine bottle from the retirement party glistened under the light. A forensic tag was attached. "This bottle tested positive for oleander extract," he said flatly. "Enough to kill." "Your fingerprints are on it, Mark," Rachel gasped. No, that's not possible." But Morrison wasn't finished. She nodded toward Emma, who had quietly entered the room with Linda at her side. Emma clutched her phone tightly, her hands shaking, but her eyes unwavering. She handed it to the detective. "These are the messages," Emma said softly. "From their phones. They talked about making it final, about Grandma being too stubborn. I recorded them." Rachel's knees buckled. "Emma, how could you?" Emma's voice trembled, but carried strength. "Because you were trying to hurt her, and I won't let you." Linda stepped forward next, her face pale but resolute. She raised her hand as though confessing in church. "I drank from the wrong glass that night. The poison wasn't meant for me. Dorothy switched it. My son wanted his mother-in-law dead, not me." Her voice cracked, but she finished with fire. "And I cannot protect him anymore." Mark's composure shattered. His face twisted, red with rage. "You think this will stick? It's her word against mine. She's old, she's paranoid, she's been unstable for years." Morrison's eyes locked on him, steel hard. "Save it for the judge. Between the toxicology, the insurance policy, the staged psychiatric reports, and your own daughter's testimony, this case is more than solid." Rachel burst into sobs, burying her face in her hands. "Mom, please. I didn't want this. It was all Mark. I just went along." Her words hung heavy, pathetic, but I did not let them sway me. I leaned forward, my voice cold. "Rachel, weakness is not an excuse. You chose silence. You chose complicity. That makes you guilty too." Tears streamed down her face as officers stepped closer. Mark lunged forward suddenly, his voice breaking into a shout. "You ruined me, Dorothy. You always thought you were better, stronger, smarter, but you're nothing but an old woman. An old, useless—" Before he could finish, Morrison snapped the cuffs onto his wrists, cutting his rant short with the metallic click. Rachel crumpled beside him, sobbing as the second officer secured her hands. The room went still. Emma clung to my arm, trembling. Linda stood silently, tears rolling down her cheeks, her face a portrait of grief and resolve. I looked at my daughter and son-in-law one last time, both bound, their victory turned to dust. My voice was quiet, but every syllable landed with weight. "You thought you could erase me, poison my glass, steal my fortune, write me off as senile, but you forgot. I am Dorothy Miller, and I do not fall so easily." The officers led them out. The house that had been filled with tension for months now breathed with silence again, a silence not of fear, but of justice. I reached for Emma's hand, squeezing it. "You were my light, my brave girl." She leaned against me, her tears warm on my shoulder. Then I turned to Linda. Our eyes met, and for the first time, there was no division between us. Only the shared sorrow of mothers betrayed by their children. She nodded slowly, and I nodded back. As David packed up the evidence, I whispered to myself, almost like a prayer, "The trap is sprung." The courtroom in Manhattan smelled faintly of varnished wood and old paper, the kind of place where lives were either shattered or salvaged with a gavel strike. I sat in the second row, Emma's hand wrapped tightly around mine, her warmth the only thing keeping my chest from caving in. At the front, Mark stood at the defense table, jaw clenched, his eyes darting from the judge to the jury, searching for a crack of sympathy. Rachel sat beside him, her shoulders hunched, her face streaked with tears. The prosecutor's voice filled the room, sharp and merciless. "The evidence is undeniable. Mark Peterson acquired oleander extract weeks before his mother-in-law's retirement party. He poured it into her wine, intending to end her life. By sheer circumstance, the glass was switched, and his own mother became the victim. That was not an accident. It was attempted murder." Mark's attorney tried to protest, waving his arms, calling it circumstantial. But the weight of the exhibits crushed every word he spoke. The poisoned wine bottle, bagged and tagged. The insurance policy with Rachel, listed as beneficiary. Emma's recordings, her young voice trembling as she captured her parents plotting. And Linda, his own mother, taking the stand, her voice breaking as she testified, "I drank what he meant for Dorothy. I am alive only because she acted quickly. My son tried to kill her." When Linda said those words, the courtroom fell silent. Mark's head dropped for the first time, his arrogance fractured. Rachel's turn came next. Her attorney pleaded leniency, describing her as a woman trapped, manipulated by a domineering husband. But when Rachel spoke, her voice carried guilt that could not be softened. I knew what Mark was planning, and I did nothing. Worse, I helped him. I told myself it was survival, that we were drowning in debt, but it was weakness. I betrayed my own mother. She broke then, her sobs echoing across the room. I closed my eyes, the sound cutting deeper than any knife. My daughter, my flesh and blood, on trial for conspiring against me. Justice was unfolding, but it felt like mourning. The judge's voice was steady, final. Mark Peterson, this court finds you guilty of attempted murder, conspiracy to commit homicide, and insurance fraud. You are sentenced to 25 years in state prison. Mark's face contorted, rage spilling out. She's lying. They're all lying. His shouts bounced off the walls, but the bailiff's firm grip silenced him as he was dragged away. Then the judge turned to Rachel. Rachel Miller, this court finds you guilty of conspiracy and document falsification. Given your cooperation and testimony, the court sentences you to 5 years with the possibility of parole in 3. Rachel sobbed harder, collapsing into her chair. Her lawyer tried to steady her, but she looked only at me. Through swollen eyes and trembling lips, she whispered, "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" I did not respond. My gaze stayed fixed on the polished floor, my hand tightening around Emma's. My silence was not cruelty, it was survival. If I let my heart break fully for Rachel in that moment, I would never recover. Emma leaned closer, whispering, "Grandma, you did the right thing." Her young voice shook with conviction. "They can't hurt you anymore." I nodded slowly, my eyes still on my daughter. Rachel's tears blurred as I looked at her, and my chest ached with the love I could never erase. But love alone could not excuse betrayal. She had chosen her side, and now the law had chosen hers. The judge dismissed the court. People shuffled out, murmuring about greed, betrayal, and the strange tragedies of family. I remained seated until the room emptied. Only Emma beside me, and the echo of Rachel's sobs still ringing in my ears. When I finally rose, my body felt heavier than it had in years. I glanced once more toward the defendant's table. Mark was gone, swallowed by the prison system. Rachel was being led away, her wrists bound, her shoulders shaking. I whispered to myself, so quietly, Emma barely heard. Justice has spoken, but a mother's heart is not so easily healed. Emma squeezed my hand, her small strength anchoring me to the present. We'll be okay, Grandma. I promise. I forced a faint smile for her sake. The trial was over, the verdict clear. Yet inside me, the wound of betrayal burned raw. Justice had been served, but justice could not mend what blood had broken. 3 months passed, and the storm that had consumed my life finally gave way to a quieter sky. The scars were still there, on my body from the fall, on my heart from the betrayal. But life had not ended with that trial. It had shifted. Linda and I found ourselves meeting every week at a small cafe tucked in a corner of Queens. It was nothing special to the world, just chipped wooden tables, a bell that jingled above the door, and the aroma of coffee that clung to your clothes when you left. But to us, it became a sanctuary. 2 women who had nearly died in different ways now sat across from each other, not as in-laws divided by betrayal, but as survivors bound by truth. She always arrived with a faint smile, though her eyes betrayed a sorrow that time would never fully erase. One afternoon, as steam curled up from her cup, she said softly, "I still hear his laugh sometimes, Dorothy, the way Mark laughed as a boy when he thought he was clever. Now I hear that same sound twisted in my memory, a reminder of what he became." I reached across the table, resting my hand on hers. "We can't change what they chose, Linda, but we can choose what we do with what remains. You saved me with your testimony. You saved yourself, too. That was not weakness. That was courage." She nodded, tears glistening but not falling. "And you saved me with that glass of wine. I should not be alive, Dorothy, but you switched it. You carried that burden instead of me." I shook my head. "No, Linda, it wasn't a burden. It was instinct. We did what mothers do. We protect. That instinct cost us, but it also saved us." Those afternoons became our ritual. We spoke of children, of mistakes, of the cruelty that comes when love is twisted by greed. Sometimes we sat in silence, letting the noise of the cafe fill the spaces words could not. And in that silence, a friendship was born, fragile, unexpected, but real. Meanwhile, Emma had become the light of my house. She stayed with me after the trial, her laughter filling the quiet halls that had once echoed with dread. She studied late into the night, preparing for college, her future brighter than the shadows she had walked through. One evening, as she closed her laptop and rubbed her tired eyes, she looked at me with a small smile. "Grandma, I used to think I was powerless, that kids don't matter, that no one listens. But you listened, you trusted me, and because of that, I wasn't powerless after all." My chest tightened with pride. "Emma, you were the strongest of all of us. You carried the truth when no one else dared. You'll carry that strength into everything you do." She hugged me tightly, whispering, "I want to make you proud." "You already have," I answered, my voice thick. At night, when the house was still, I would sit by the window with a cup of tea and let my thoughts drift. The trial had ended, the verdict clear, but my heart carried both justice and grief. Mark was locked away. Rachel faced her sentence, but nothing could undo the fact that my own daughter had stood against me. That wound bled quietly, not visible to the world, but felt with every beat. And yet, life went on. I planted new flowers in the garden. I read books Emma recommended. I walked slowly, carefully, up and down those same stairs, each step a reminder that I had survived what was meant to end me. I knew people whispered in the neighborhood. They called it a tragedy, a scandal. Some pitied me, others admired me. But I did not live for their whispers. I lived for the lesson carved deep in me. Age is not weakness. Age is experience, sharpened by every trial endured. One afternoon, as I walked home from the cafe with Linda, the sky burning orange above Queens, I felt a strange peace settle inside me. I turned to her and said, "You know, people think growing old means fading away. They think it means surrendering. But they forget something important." She looked at me curious. "What's that?" "That growing old means surviving, and survival makes us sharper than they can ever imagine." That night, in the quiet of my living room, I spoke aloud words that had been forming since the moment I switched those glasses at my retirement party. Words not for anyone else, but for myself, for Emma, for anyone who would ever listen. Being old does not mean being weak. Experience is the sharpest weapon, and sometimes one simple act, switching a glass of wine, can change an entire destiny. As I whispered those words, Emma's laughter drifted from upstairs, and I smiled. The house, once haunted, now felt alive again. The story did not end with rage or triumph. It ended with balance, sweetness and bitterness, loss and healing, grief and hope intertwined. And the message lingered like the last note of a hymn: never underestimate your parents, never dismiss their wisdom, because their love and their strength reach further than any scheme, and their wisdom cuts deeper than any betrayal.